Navy beat Army. Army-Navy game tomorrow. So lots of people coming into D.C. today who are going to the game or going to be broadcasting from the game or just celebrating a great tradition, America's oldest rivalry, is really Harvard-Yale. But the one that's gotten the most attention of the year is this one, Army-Navy. And Navy is, I'm a civilian, so I have got really no dog in this fight. But I got a son, a son-in-law, and a nephew. Son's now gone to the reserves. The son-in-law and the nephew are on active duty. My father-in-law is a Marine. My brother-in-law is a Marine. So I'm surrounded by Go Navy people, so I've just picked up the Go Navy gear. Go Navy, beat Army, and then they can all leave me alone for a year. We got to go back to Ohio State beating Tennessee at the Shoe on the 21st. Good morning to you. Good Friday to you. Lots ahead for a busy weekend of holiday shopping. Let me do the setup of the program. Ben Dominich is coming along as he does most Fridays. We'll do a weekend review. A lot of news to review. I'm also going to talk with an extraordinarily interesting guy, Shyam Sankar. Shyam is the Chief Technology Officer of Palantir. I used to own Palantir. I sold it all last week. I did so when it became obvious I was going to book Sankar after reading his 18th thesis on defense reform and seeing he's being tipped, though not nominated yet, to be DepSec #2 at the Department of Defense under Pete Hegseth. And you always wait a little bit when your nominee has to get over some hurdles, which Pete is doing, to come up with the deputy secretary. But traditionally, the Secretary of Defense is the outside guy and the counselor to the president and the person who's dealing with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And the DepSec does a lot of that too, but the DepSec also looks inside the building to manage it. And if there's ever a building in need of reform, it's the Pentagon and the Department of Defense, and Sankar is the guy. I've not talked to him before, but I have read his 18 theses, and that which I understood to be true. So we'll talk to him next hour. I'll go over that at the bottom of the hour. The biggest headline of the morning, there are two. Assad's collapse triggers race to find missing chemical weapons. This is a Joby Warwick piece in the Washington Post, and Joby knows the region, he knows the issues, and he knows that in the 53 years of Assad dictatorship, they hid away a lot of chemical weapons. There are a lot of WMD in Syria. Israel has been methodically destroying them for the last 4 days, and that's good. What they know of, what they can find, the plants, the rockets, the storage depots, they're bombing them. I think it's more than 1,400 strikes. Good on the IDF. We do not want chemical weapons in the hands of anybody, much less jihadis. There's also a story in the Wall Street Journal, which is fascinating to me. Trump team weighs options, including airstrikes, to stop Iran's nuclear program. It is widely recognized that Iran is not on its heels, not on its back foot. It's on its back. It's absolutely lost. Its axis of resistance has been blown clear, sky high in Lebanon and in Gaza. Syria has fallen. That was a key component of Iran's regional play for dominance. They've lost their president in a mysterious plane crash. They are obviously penetrated by Mossad at every level of the IRGC, the Quds Force, and indeed Khamenei might be a Mossad agent for all we know at this point. And all they've got left is the threat of getting a bomb. And Israel took out one of their non-declared nuclear sites in response to the second Iranian attack on Israel. That leaves 2 to 4 more, and they're deeply buried, and they would need our B-52s and our bunker busters to go with them. And the Israeli press is reporting that Israel is getting ready to go after those nuclear sites. And the Wall Street Journal reports that Donald Trump is weighing options for stopping Iran. Now, this wouldn't be a war. This is basically 3 hours in the air over Iran, along with Israel. Would be nice if the Gulf allies came along with us as well. And they just crushed the nuclear infrastructure. Might be necessary to crush the oil export deal. Maximum pressure is coming back, and it's a good thing. We've had appeasement 12 out of the last 16 years. 8 years of appeasement of Iran under Obama because of a weird worldview that he and Ben Rhodes cooked up in some idea machine that they could do a Nixon to China with a theocracy, which actually is not possible. You can't really negotiate with theocracies that have end-time fantasies that are bizarre, and that the human portion of the end times thinks it can have an impact on the end times. And so that's what we're dealing with. Theocrats who are fanatics in Iran. A lot of people in America don't like to think about this. They'd rather worry about Christian nationalism, which isn't really anything at all. They'd rather worry about Republicans or Donald Trump instead of Iran's theocrats getting a nuclear weapon, which is the biggest problem, immediate problem. Second one is Russia trying to engage NATO and pushing, but the biggest threat of all, of course, is China. And in order to keep pace with China and stay ahead of China in some areas, the Department of Defense needs to reform everything. So Sankar is coming by, and I am very, very thankfully, as we're going to talk about that. How bad are our problems? This is a side story. It's not the main story. Boeing delays mean Trump won't fly on the new Air Force One. I said, what? President-elect Donald Trump didn't get to fly on a new Air Force One during his first term. He likely won't get to fly on a new presidential plane in his second term either. The long-delayed project has fallen so far behind that Boeing has told the Air Force that it expects to deliver the new jets after Trump leaves the White House, which means 2029. I'm so astonished by this. It's one or two planes. They might have two of them. And they can't get them done. And Trump was complaining about it when he took office the first time. It's 8 years later. And they're saying we're 4 years away. I know Boeing has had its trouble. I understand that Boeing has had its trouble, but that's crazy. Donald Trump's not having trouble. Donald Trump is, in essence, the acting president. Peggy Noonan noticed this in her column today for the Wall Street Journal, which I posted over at my X. And I think it's great. Donald Trump is the acting president because we all know Joe Biden's not really there. Joe Biden's people are team appeasement. Nobody respects them. They can't get any, their lunch money is taken when they go to the Middle East by everyone. And they're going to disappear into the obscurity of think tanks. They'll come forth for the Aspen Institute annual gathering of lefties. And the lefties will get together with ProPublica and publish their stories in Politico. And they don't matter. Because appeasement's been tried and found to be dangerous for 12 out of the last 16 years, we want to go back to deterrence. And restoring deterrence means reforming the Pentagon. A lot of that coming up. Let me, however, play for you Donald Trump at the New York Stock Exchange yesterday. It's kind of fun. He is obviously loving this. Here he is ringing the bell, cut number 7, Donald Trump ringing the bell at the market yesterday. And when you look at the picture, if you're watching on the Salem News Channel, they could have gone on in terms of applause for 10 minutes. They were over the moon, and the market had a great start, and it settled back down. In fact, let me do the market report right now, brought to you by our friends at AmericanFederal.com. AmFed Coin and Bullion has been selling gold and buying gold for 40-plus years, and Nick Rovich and his team provide the market report every day. But I do want to remind you that if you're going to buy gold this morning costs $2,687. $2,687. It fell yesterday because the market got a little over its skis and then it backed up a little bit. But $2,687 isn't the price you'll pay. You got to get your cash or your check's got to clear. They do take checks. They also take cashier's checks if you want to get the information done. But it all begins when you go to AmericanFederal.com or you give a call to American Federal, 1-800-221-7694. 800-221-7694. The best gold people in the country, absolutely upfront, absolutely straightforward, transparent. They're moving with me to the afternoons come January 13th. I'm very glad about that. Since we'll have a little bit more of a better fix during the course of the day, we'll move their spot around. But the market yesterday was somewhat disappointing after this big start. Donald Trump was there. It went up 0.53 points on the regular market, 0.54 on the S&P 500, and 0.66 on the NASDAQ. It went down. So every one of the major indexes were down. The 10-year Treasury was up 4.334. Inflation is not cured. We need the tax bill in the first reconciliation to get the economy going. We also need the border and the military rebuild and energy and housing, permit clearance, regulatory reform. Put it all in one bill and move it quickly. We got to get the economy going again, or the Republicans are going to get wiped out in 2026. It's their issue. It's on the members of the House to realize they're going to be in the minority if they don't get moving on a big bill, one, to get the economy going again. Now, gold at 2,687 is a little bit of a bargain over what it's been at. But if you want to talk gold, call Nick, 1-800-221-7694, or go to AmericanFederal.com and talk to him about it. But I'm here to tell you, you do not want to wait, Republicans, on getting the economy going. Yesterday should have shown you that maybe the Trump rally will go on for a while. The Trump rally's been big, it's been widespread, but you can't count on it going on. We'll get some clips of the president from the New York Stock Exchange. Joined now by the poet laureate of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Hugh. You know, I don't like to repeat myself, but sometimes history repeats itself. When I first began listening to the show, I set my alarm clock radio to 6:05 a.m. in Tarzana, and then at some point, the show moved to the afternoon, and I wrote a poem for it. And I went to the Tarzana Joe archive and found that poem. Now, sometimes I can't even find my keys, but I found this poem, and it goes like this. A fine bud opens to a finer flower, not at the dawn, but at a later hour, and greater growth is always granted after the seed has been transplanted, when topics crucial to this nation have reached the point of germination. Yes, I may be considered silly, comparing a lawyer to a lily. Nonetheless, I'll sing my tune. Reason blooms brighter in the afternoon. And now the garden is expanded if you live Pacific Standard. Hosted, if I haven't stated, by a man urbane and cultivated. So if wrong from reason you would prune, 'tis to this station you must tune. To those who say that I lack focus, comparing a talk show to a crocus, too long my metaphor extended, this poem, mercifully, has ended. That's Rhyme and Reason by Tarzana Joe, written during the term of Governor Gray Davis.
That's when we did move in 2001 from morning drive to afternoon drive on the West Coast. Now we're moving back to afternoon drive on the East Coast. But Joe, your poems will now be heard coast to coast every Friday morning. And if you want one, no matter where you are, TarzanaJoe@Reagan.com, TarzanaJoe@Reagan.com. Debuting with the weekly poem on the week of January 13th in the afternoon in the East and at noon to 3 in the West. TarzanaJoe@Reagan.com. Or just visit his website, TarzanaJoe.com, and hit the button, I need a poem. Do you have a little Reds flare around that, Joe, like an emergency button?
No, hopefully there are no emergency situations that require life-saving poetry, but I have to consider it.
Someone somewhere needs a jolt of optimism to get through the day, and always go to Tarzana Joe, but don't delay. There's my bit of verse for the day. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Hugh.
I had to stun Joe with a little great poetry. Everything is over at TarzanaJoe.com. Don't let me forget, the inauguration is coming up. If you want to win a ticket, actually 2 tickets to the inauguration, 2 tickets to an inaugural ball. There are 6 or 7, I don't know which one. They're done by states. And Donald Trump goes to them all. The presidential inauguration VIP experience is a campaign or a contest that we are operating. All you have to do is text the word Trump to 94878. That's TRUMP to 94878. A trip for 2 to Washington, D.C., tickets to the Trump inauguration, tickets to inaugural ball. You'll love it. Let me keep thanking you. Angel Tree continues to pick up momentum. We're about halfway to our goal. I'd like to get 5,000 kids taken care of. And that's 5,000 donations of $30 or however many that we need. And so I would love to have you become a participant in this. Give a listen to what it means to a mother who saw the power of an Angel Tree gift.
A person was on his door with a present and a bow on it, and he's jumping up and down. Thank you, nice church lady, for my present. And she said, oh, no. Come here, honey. And she said she got down on her knees and she looked at him in the eye. She said, see this message? This is from your mom. And she read the message to him and gave him the present. And she said he immediately started to cry, and she knew in her heart that she needed to stay in touch with him, that this was something God had given her to do, an opportunity to be Jesus to a family that was in the dark and to bring some light into their home and into their lives.
I love that. I love that because nice church lady is in it. Please be generous to Angel Trade, the banners at HughHewitt.com. Right now, there's a lot of angst in the Department of Defense. Pete Hegseth is coming in and he wants to clear out woke. And it is highly likely that in some senior executive position, we will see Shyam Sankar, who is the Chief Technology Officer of Palantir. I no longer own Palantir stock. Once Sankar became available as a guest to me, I sold it. Because I don't want to have anyone suggesting I'm having him on, or even thinking I'm having him on because I'm an investor in Palantir. I don't do that. I think it's a great company. But when you go into this business, you have to avoid that kind of obvious conflict. So, why am I talking him up? There is a website, the Defense Reformation. You can find it. I just posted it at X, on my account at X. If you follow me at Hugh Hewitt on X, you will see the number 18 in the word theses, THESES.com. 18 theses. And it's only 20 pages long. And Shyam wrote it in October of this year, before he knew that Donald Trump was going to be president. He was writing it for the national security. It has 4 sections. Section 1 is the Last Supper and the Great Schism. Now, most of you will know what the Last Supper is if you're a defense professional. And I've mentioned it a few times. Dr. Jerry Hendricks has been on the show a number of times talking about procurement, has mentioned it. In 1993, America wanted a peace dividend. Barbara Boxer talked about it every day. And defense spending was slashed by, how much do you think defense spending was slashed by? 67%. The SecDef held a dinner at the Pentagon, which is colloquially referred to now as the Last Supper, to tell the 51 prime contractors of the Department of Defense in 1993, to tell them they would not all survive. There are 5 primes left. Part of our major problem. So what is the department's heresy, which is section 2? The department's heresy, I want to read it to you. The ideology and management approach, now deeply ingrained in the defense management culture, process, law, and regulation, is based on its concepts of scientific management that were once fashionable in the Soviet Union and the vanguard of the 1950s auto industry before it was outcompeted by Japan in the 1970s. Centralized predictive program budgeting, management, and oversight were then thought to be superior to the trial and error and messiness of time-constrained, decentralized experimentation and the seemingly wastefulness of having multiple sources rapidly prototyping potential solutions. So we went down to cost plus, and we went down to 5 primes, and we're a mess. So what Sankar comes up with, and I'll talk with him about, are the 18 theses of the defense reformation that we need. Number 1, monopsony. Monopsony, not monopoly, but monopsony. The root of our pathology is a lack of competition inside of the Department of Defense. Avoid a monopolistic buyer at all costs by approximating market mechanism and dynamics as a key principle of the design of the DoD. The Space Force is doing this, by the way. What looks like duplication is insurance against complacency and unpredictability. You're building, for example, 2 companies are building DDGs, destroyers, so that they compete against each other on price, maybe 3, maybe 4, not 1. Much as we love our destroyers in Maine, might be good to have more than Bath Iron Works building destroyers. Number 2, cost plus contracting makes the nation dumber, slower, and poorer. And that's kind of incontrovertible. We'll talk more about that. But he uses the F-35 as an example, and I'll ask Sankar about that. I'll also use Air Force One as another example. Cost plus launch kept costs in the stratosphere. When you compete commercially, it drives cost into the ground. So when you give a cost plus contract to one contractor, it's going to be more expensive than you thought, and it's not going to have competition. It's not going to improve in design or productivity. If you have competition, you improve in design and productivity. Number 4, A budget is a plan, and no plan survives first contact. Military doctrine states plans are useless, even planning is invaluable. What I support the president's budget is an evasion. No company could survive if it took 2 years to POM budget for projects internally, DoD's Program Objective Memorandum, or POM process. They would be outcompeted. And that is what our adversaries are doing to us now. We must invest in closing the cash chain to close the kill chain. The fiscal OODA loop to move money around is not survivable. We must be able to reprogram money inside of 2 months, not 2 years. Messy and imperfect discretion is required. We require DevSecOps for budgets. Amen. You've got to hire smart people. You've got to trust them to buy what is best and to buy it fast. Number 4, the person is the program, the primacy of people. Talent is not fungible, Sankar writes. Talent problem fit is rare, it's hard, and it's determinative. Rotations of officers every 2 to 3 years only ensures that they haven't had enough time to learn anything beyond surface level platitudes. I'm not sure I agree with this. Up through the general officer rank. I think moving people through, I've watched the Navy program, and I'm very impressed with it. Moving them up in order, and Marines do it as well, so does the Army, so does the Air Force. Moving young officers up rapidly through a number of billets. Now, they might waste some time, and they might not be top-heavy enough when it comes to field officers. They might be too top-heavy when it comes to general officers, except in the Marine Corps. But talent is prime, and it's not fungible. You've got to find it, you've got to keep it, you've got to train it. Military is pretty good about this. Not sure Pentagon contracting is at all. Number 5, the only requirement is winning. Amen. Number 6, put the pebble in the right shoe. And Sankar writes, you can't separate the roles of creating requirements and delivering capabilities. All value accretes in the seams between teams. There is an unnecessary seam between requirement and solution. No company could compete commercially today under such a structure. Instead, we need more competition inside of government across programs with overlapping mandates. Rickover built and operated the subs. He constructed many of the safety standards he would then enforce, and he was often forced to send letters to himself to request certain things. Innovation is a consequence of productivity. If we can't produce, you can't innovate. Innovation is the consequence of productivity. Remember that, please. The large language model revolution was inspired by Google's attempt to improve Google Translate 3%, not fly blue sky thinking disconnected from reality. That's so wild. Number 4, Conway's Law. You ship your org chart. I find this fascinating. Goldwater Nichols did not go far enough. That was the big Defense Department overhaul. You can't have a joint Department of Services having monopolies on their Title X equipping responsibilities. It cuts right to the heart of this. I do not even know what a CCMD is, but it says that CCMDs need budget to introduce strategic competition. He can tell us what that means. I do know he's right about number 9. National security is economic prosperity. Absolutely right. Make the primes business worthy. Absolutely right. Again, competition, more primes. Risk capital, not taxpayer capital. When you force defense innovation into the private sector, people are risking their own money, not the taxpayer money. They're very careful about it, but they swing for the fences and sometimes they lose. Palantir is one big because they've been innovating for 20 years. Small business programs should not be welfare. Amen. We don't need to give away a single defense dollar based upon diversity, equity, or inclusion. We need to give them all away based upon lethality and productivity. Number 13, DoD and its proxy forces must stop competing with industry. Yes, federally funded research and development centers have false moral certitude being nonprofits. Now, I'm not against DARPA, but I want to know what he has to say about that. Productivity is more lethal than weapon stockpiles. Now, so we can pile up a bunch of old armaments. We can give them the Ukraine. That's a good service. But if we are not constantly innovating the weaponry that we have, it becomes old and falls behind. Number 15, reference architectures can't be created, they emerge. I don't understand. This is engineering talk. You'll have to explain that to me. But I do like 16, the rule of law works. Yes, it does. Number 17, let the people speak to the mission. Right? Let the people inside the Pentagon tell you what the mission is, ought to be, and how you get there. I think Sankar is going to be inside the Pentagon soon. And the key thing is to launch more primes. I think that's the bottom line here. Finally, warriors fight with guns and grit. Warfighters need to know how to code, not because they will build industrial strength platforms the industry is delivering. They won't, not without $10 billion in the nation's top computer scientists, but because software is the most important and malleable weapon system. Software is a unique American strength, and our warriors must develop fluency to understand how to wield the software industrial base to maximize lethality. Knowing if your feature request will take 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week, or 1 year to implement is critical. Knowing how to bend the software to your will means you will be able to bend the enemy to your will. Software and its malleability will define the clock speed of the OODA loop. The OODA loop, for those of you in Pittsburgh, is observe, orient, decide, and act. It's what fighter pilots must do. They got to get inside of the opponent's OODA loop, observe what they're doing, orient themselves to the enemy, decide what to do, and act. The OODA loop. We'll be talking to Sankar about that as well. And the end of it is the resurrection of the American industrial base. I hold that a little rebellion now and then is a good thing and is necessary in the political world as storms in the physical. Thomas Jefferson, a letter to James Madison. Sankar ends his report this way. I nail these theses to the Pentagon Metro entrance, not because I hate the department and my nation, but because I love them profoundly. We are in a state of undeclared emergency. For more than 3 decades, we've accepted a stagnant defense industrial base born from a complacent monopsony with no great power competition. We have prayed at the altar of process for too long. Change is now possible because we realize there is something worse than change, irrelevance and obsolescence. We have no time to waste in resurrecting the American industrial base we depended on in the depths of the Cold War. It was the American industrial base that underwrote the American victory and Pax Americana. It can once again, if we embrace it as our savior. Shyam Sankar, Palantir CTO. He's joining me next hour. Do not miss it. And go to 18 Theses to read this, because I think it's going to be the driving document at the Pentagon once Donald Trump is officially the president. Good Friday to you. I want to make sure I tell you about this book, Turning Small Talk into Big Talk, by our friend Jan Janura. Lots of you are buying this book. You go to jansbooks.com, and you're giving it as a stocking stuffer because it's the gift that will keep on giving to you if you have to talk to whomever receives it. If you have a talk adder in your house, someone who just talks at you, never listens, never asks questions, never gets above sports or the latest thing they saw on Netflix, give them this book. They say, oh, I read it, I love it, it's easy, it's a stocking stuffer, bestseller, Publishers Weekly, Business Weekly, Turning Small Talk into Big Talk. Jen is also the founder of The Wild Adventure, TWA.US. I have been on it, Dwayne's been on it. I talked to Jen yesterday. I want to know how many young guns have signed up. A number of people are scholarshiping their 21 to 35-year-olds. And there are so many testimonials to why The Wild Adventure is a great gift. It's a bit pricier than your average gift, but you'll change a young person's life. They can go with their friend. You can send your son. You can send your son and his friend. You can send your brother. You can send your cousin. You can send anyone you want who would benefit from some time in the wilderness. Not really wilderness. I mean, you don't sleep outside. But you catch wonderful fish. They're back in the Madison. It's been 3 years since I was there, so it's not fished out anymore. But you have to visit TWA.US, and it's signing up soon. Let me tell you about a second book for Christmas, Dawn's Early Light, from Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts. Dawn's Early Light. Take care of mom, dad, and the kids, and you'll take care of everything. I was talking about Dawn's Early Light yesterday with a friend in Crystal City who pointed out to me that there is a marriage penalty in the SALT deduction. It's $10,000 whether you file jointly or individually. So there's a penalty for filing jointly. I couldn't believe it. I said, really? He said, yeah, it's in Dawn's Early Light. Take a look at it. If we want to be pro-family, we have to reform that part of SALT. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't go with one big bill. We should go with one big bill. I think we're winning that argument on the Hill. We'll see. But in the meantime, Heritage Foundation, sponsor of this show, wants you to be smart this Christmas about what's coming next year. Go and get Dawn's Early Light at Amazon.com. Dawn's Early Light at Amazon.com. One final thing I want to tell you about. Just one last thing before I begin with Ben Domenech and the Week in Review. It's Angel Tree. And I need you to be as generous as you possibly can, because there are literally hundreds of thousands of children who have mom and or dad in prison. Angel Tree will reach as many of them as they have multiples of $30 contributed to them. So if you want 5 more kids to have the Christmas, well, I want to play the audio again. Tom Tradup sent me this wonderful audio. This is of a church volunteer. Listen.
A person was on his door with a present and a bow on it, and he's jumping up and down. Thank you, nice church lady, for my present. And she said, oh, no, 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 no. Come here, honey. And she said she got down on her knees and she looked at him in the eye. She said, see this message? This is from your mom. And she read the message to him and gave him the present. And she said he immediately started to cry, and she knew in her heart that she needed to stay in touch with him, that this was...
Nice church ladies and nice church men, you don't have to have a patio with a tree. Go and find a tree at HughHewitt.com. $30 takes care of a kid. Finally, I got to warn you, the world of the CR approaches, and we cannot let Big Pharma get a bailout. Now, I do want the AM Radio in Every Vehicle Act to pass and be attached to CR, but I do not want any change to health care. I especially don't want a giveaway to Big Pharma in the last 30 days. Conservatives for Lower Health Care Costs is a sponsor of our show. They put together the website, which is called pharmawindfall.com. I had Senator Pat Toomey on yesterday talking about it in detail, what Big Pharma is trying to do. They always do this. They have a legion of lobbyists, and they're always looking for a way to call a win. So even though Big Pharma executives in Philadelphia might not know about it, their lobbyists are down here trying to drain billions away from consumers and PMBs. Don't let them do it. Go to pharmawindfall.com. Stand in the gap. pharmawindfall.com. Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. That's Donald Trump ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange yesterday. The cheering went on for almost 6 minutes. Kind of a wild day on the market, and here to talk about that with me is Ben Domenech. Good morning, Ben. How are you?
I'm good, Hugh, and I'm looking forward to the Army-Navy game this weekend. I'll be there along with a bunch of other folks. Who do you like in that?
We are a Navy family. Go Navy, beat Army. There's no other way. My son-in-law worshipped your father-in-law because my son-in-law is a jet fighter and thought your father-in-law, hung the moon. And that's fine. I played for him some of the times that Senator McCain would beat up on me on the air, and it made him happier. I want to ask you first about inauguration, Ben. Salem Media is giving away tickets to the inauguration to one ball. People can text the word Trump to 94878. But I have told people, text Trump to 94878, that inauguration people are of two kinds. Those that go because they have to and those that go because they want to. Which are you, Ben?
Oh, I want to. I'm one. I mean, I know that's going to sound very cheesy, and Mr. Smith goes to Washington, but I actually have never. There's certain events in politics that even in my age, I have not lost the feeling of pride, and I feel like participating and attending inaugurations is one of those, covering them, as I have and as you have. And I think that it's a real tone setter often for what we are going to see. Obviously, we remember the first Trump inauguration and how it really, I think, ripped open so much in terms of what he was going to be as a change agent, that he was not going to be someone who was going to come in silently or going to be just trying to make people like him. And that's, I think, going to be an interesting tone-setting moment for him in this time around. It's an opportunity to, I think, as he said, express unity. But I think that that's also going to be something that comes with unity around the agenda that he has been tasked with and the mandate that he's been given to deliver on some pretty incredible change for the American people.
Now, Ben, I was there for the inauguration of Donald Trump in 2016. I was in the NBC studios, which are there on the corner overlooking, and we listened, and I thought, the American Carnage speech did not bode well for the country. So I'm hoping that Trump's second inaugural will be more like Lincoln's first, where he said, "We are not enemies, but friends." What do you think he'll say? Do you think he's going to strike a different tone?
So knowing his speechwriters a little bit and knowing, so much about the attitude that he's had that has changed and shifted with this victory, I think we are going to see a change in tone. The shock to the system that he represented in 16 is very different from the attitude toward him today. And we're already seeing that, especially in terms of the way that he's been greeted on Capitol Hill in terms of the nominees and the people who he's sending up there. You are, I think, going to see many Democrats who essentially this time around are going to do a replay, an alt history of things that they could have done in the post-16 environment that would have allowed them to actually work with Donald Trump. Now, there's danger here for conservative Americans who want to see that agenda put in place that's very dramatic and that goes after so many of the different targets within government reform that they want to see. And certainly there are going to be some Democrats who try to play into Donald Trump's interests in order to prevent that from happening or protect their little fiefdoms. But I do think that there's opportunity here, particularly among some of the more populist members of the Democratic Party. You see John Fetterman's attitude already being one that's more open. And I think that that's going to have a very different play in terms of the scenarios going forward. That's going to be one to navigate. Keep in mind, if you rewind to the post-16 election of Donald Trump, Ezra Klein in January was writing about how Democrats had an opportunity to work with Trump, that they could even potentially come to some kind of compromise as it related to health care and entitlements. And even Chuck Schumer was sounding that note very briefly in the aftermath of that election. Of course, what happened next is the Michael Flynn situation, Russiagate, the complete misdirection of the American people, in my opinion, intentional on the part of some and unintentional on the part of idiots, that took over the entire conversation in that first term and really prevented any of the Democrats from being able to work with him. They were going to be killed by the resistance movement on their own side if they were going to cross over and do anything like that. That's not going to be true this time around. I think it's going to be far more muted in terms of people not wanting to be willing to work with Trump. And you see already so many people who, have expressed a willingness to cross the lines and work with him. But that, as I said, that's something that conservatives need to guard against and be willing to really criticize, I think, from the right, some of the things that Democrats are going to try to do, especially considering there isn't a single American taxpayer dollar that they don't think that they can spend better than you.
Now, Ben, I remember American Carnage. The torpedoes were already in the water. Comey, Brennan, and Clapper had already ambushed Donald Trump at Trump Tower. The women were assembling for the Pink Hat March the next day. Antifa was burning down buildings in central D.C. or trying to on January the 21st in 2016. I think it's very different. I think the shock created that. The shock win created that reaction, and they thought he was dangerous. Comey, Brennan, and Clapper took the law into their own hands. But I don't think that exists now. I think he kind of intimidates everybody except the nuts, and they maybe want to get along with him. Are we being overly optimistic?
I don't think you're being overly optimistic, and I think that one of the other things that really happened, obviously, that made the difference here is that we're not coming off of the presidency of Barack Obama. We're coming off of the presidency of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, with Biden essentially having been AWOL over the last 6 months from any real decision-making, and that's something that I think is a very different scenario. People were shocked to move on from Barack Obama to Donald Trump. They were shocked that Hillary didn't win. They were shocked by everything that happened. This time around, there's just less shock. People are not as surprised. And then the definitiveness of the win, at least in electoral terms, was one that clearly showed the American people are just not interested in going in this direction anymore. They want and demand change. And so I think a lot of these Democrats are looking internally right now. They're assessing which direction they ought to go. There's going to be a real fight within their ranks. You already see the challenges being launched by people like AOC against the older Democrats who want to still hold on to power even after all these years. And I think you're going to see a generational shift within that party that has been long overdue, and one that even though it moves them further left on some things, it also makes them more populist on others, and that bodes well for the potential of Donald Trump to work with some of them, at least, on various issues of importance. That whole scenario is completely different than the one that we experienced last time around.
Yeah, I'm an optimist. I am an optimist. But I got to ask you about speeches. John McConnell is probably the best speechwriter in town, and he's got a great partner in Matt. But John McConnell is a gifted wordsmith. Now that Michael Gerson, another gifted wordsmith, is gone and Peggy Noonan is retired, you can hire McConnell. Do you think they will bring in outside talent? I used to do speechwriting 1,000 years ago, and it takes a certain kind of approach, and some people are good at it and some people are not. Do you think they'll bring in outside help?
Well, they did originally in 16 and had basically Newt's associated folks parachute in to help out significantly in those early days. They've been in that world for a long time now and working on his speeches, and I think that they will get some outside input. But this is also the man himself. He cares deeply, I think, at this point about sending the message that he wants to personally send, and he cares more, I think, about these speeches now than he necessarily did last time around, understanding that they have more significance and weight. And look, you only get a chance to do a do-over like this once, and he's going to, I think, have more input from people and listen to it and weigh it. But I do think we're going to see that kind of unity message, because my whole attitude about this second term, for good or for ill, is that Donald Trump wants to emerge from this presidency being enormously popular. He is going to try to do things that he thinks Americans want and deliver on promises, but also basically not run into some of the same types of issues that he did last time around with spastic approaches to problems. He wants to be able to project strength and come out of this being a beloved figure. That was always the danger with him the first time around that I was concerned about. As it turned out, he was willing, because of how much his enemies came after him, targeted him personally, and became the kind of crazed resistance that they were. That led him to make some tough decisions that benefited the conservative movement and the country.
Ben, there are two big debates in Congress right now. What goes in the CR, and let's put that aside. That'll be over before we know it. And then, do the Republicans pursue one reconciliation and budget bill or two? Incoming Majority Leader was on this program. Thune was on this program on Wednesday. He kind of leant towards two. Leader Scalise was on this program yesterday. He leant towards one. What do you think?
I think it's going to be one. I think that while John Thune certainly has his perspective on this, that is valid and has some weight. I think that Jason Smith and I think that some of the other people who are working on the House side understand that they can't trust that they're going to get more than one good crack at this. And there's arguments to be made on both sides, and I'm sure that the incoming Majority Leader made his. The issues there, I think, are how much do you want to risk the possibility of having lost momentum as you go through this year with so many different big issues on your plate that you end up in a situation where you can't do the kind of things that you want. And that, I believe, is always a risk in politics. You have to strike while the iron's hot. And to me, that is the argument that's going to end up winning the day. That the House, obviously dealing with as thin a margin as they are, is going to have to come to real agreement within the conference about this, and we'll see how that plays out. But I do think that argument is currently prevailing on their side, and Scalise's side, I should say, if there is a side in this, it seems to me to be winning at the moment.
I hope so. I hope it's one, because it's too big of a risk to bet on two. Yeah. Let me now talk with you about ProPublica. We got about a minute and a half. I think the mask slipped when they went after Hegseth. And I think they've been backpedaling, and a couple of their fellow lefties are circling the wagon around them. But everybody now knows ProPublica is just a left-wing hit shop. Do you think they handled this attack on Hegseth well at all? And how can they get out of the hole that they insist on keep digging in?
So on the one hand, you could say, hey, it's not our fault. West Point told us something about Pete Hegseth that was not true. And we assumed that they were telling the truth because, of course, West Point spokesperson tells you something, you assume that they're telling the truth. But then when you read the emails that ProPublica was sending to Hegseth's team, the very first email is, "You've got an hour to respond to us about why he lied about getting into West Point."
Yep.
And I do want to say one thing, too, that is kind of a mask-flipping element of this. If you know anything about West Point, it's actually not that hard to get into West Point compared to getting into Princeton. As long as you haven't pissed off your congressman, or and have the capacity to run a mile, and have the basics of what you can do. Getting into West Point, while something that is impressive, is not something that he got into Princeton. He's going to get into West Point.
Well, I point out there was no predicate for the inquiry, because not only did he get into Princeton, which means you're going to get into West Point, he then joined the Army and went to combat, which would validate the assertion he was almost going to go to West Point.
But to me,
why do you think they went looking?
But to me, Hugh, that's also kind of an indication of the type of person who's asking this question who doesn't even understand that. They don't even understand that. But look, they went after it because they're a left-wing hit shop. I've written extensively about what they've done in targeting Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, et cetera, and they exist to regurgitate these things. But as I've said to you time and again, they have a budget that you could not reach if you combined every major conservative, right-of-center magazine in America. It is not something that people, for whatever reason, they leave this out. They have a massive war chest that they use to spend an enormous amount of money on people to do exactly this, to research and to go after.
Oppo research. I just want people to know, ProPublica is Media Matters with a better brand. That's it.
I agree.
Ben, coming up after the break, the bottom of the hour, Shyam Sankar is going to join me as the Chief Technology Officer at Palantir. And I don't know if you have read his PDF, The Defense Reformation, which he published in October. It's only 20 pages. It's got 18 theses on what have to happen at the Pentagon. And he's being tipped as the DepSec. I don't know if that's going to happen. But in terms of Defense Department reformation, especially in acquisition, do you think it's possible to actually get it done?
I think that we're going to have as good of a shot as we've ever had, Hugh. That doesn't mean that it's going to get done. The kind of barriers that exist to this. But it is something where you actually have some people, including the folks over at Palantir, who have been looking at this very hard. And they've also, I think, looked at it through the lens of what failed in the past, as attempts have gone to try to make a difference in a real problem for not just the United States of America, but for the world. And so if it's ever going to happen, it's going to be in this moment, especially given the fact that you have a President Donald Trump who wants to strengthen the military and is very aware of the problem. Is very aware that this is an issue that, he came in, I think, and was not really thinking about stuff like this, but then the experience when dealing with the Pentagon, with the situation in Afghanistan, and witnessing, the types of waste and the types of problems that so many are dealing with, and has led to such discouragement within the American military. I think that this is going to be one of the priorities, and it's consistent with the overall approach of this is about cleaning up and dealing with these thwarting problems that have created massive issues for the American people and for the security of the country.
Ben, let's close with this. People think Trump is hiring billionaires. I think he is actually hiring successful entrepreneurs who have been so successful that they turn out to be billionaires or 100 millionaires or something like that, and that it's not unlike when FDR went to the Ivy League and emptied it out when the New Deal started. Do you see a parallel there that instead of going to Harvard and Yale and all the big brains that they used, he's going out to Silicon Valley and getting all their big brains?
Yeah, I do see that parallel, and I also wonder about the fact that when people are criticizing the inclusion of these folks, wouldn't you want to find people who had been extremely successful in what they had tried to do before? I don't understand the rationale of criticism of this way, especially given that one of the biggest problems we've had over the years in Washington, as you know, is all the people who come in who haven't made money, who are looking at their future through the lens of which jobs am I going to end up with after I'm done here? How do I end up on the board of Raytheon? How do I end up in the position where I can make a ton of money when I leave? That's something that none of these billionaires have a problem with. They've already made their money. They don't need to turn this into something that's profitable for themselves. And that's I believe, an advantage. It's not something that is a negative about this at all. I appreciate the fact that he's including some of these very smart folks who are coming from outside of Washington, far outside of it, who can bring a new eye to many of the problems that have existed here for so long.
Last time he brought in Wall Street, and there's some of that still, but this time he's bringing in Silicon Valley, and we have 1 minute, Ben. Those are completely different mindsets, I think.
Completely different mindsets. And also people who are dedicated to delivering on things faster, better, cheaper, and they understand that that's something government fundamentally has not been able to do. They also understand the risks of the regulatory state, having gone through the California experience of understanding how dangerous leftism is when it takes over government and prevents the types of decisions that they want to be able to make as entrepreneurs and as creative people.
Thank you, Ben Domenech. Follow him at B. Domenech on X. Follow him on and his podcast as well, and over at The Spectator, where he's editor at large. So pleased to welcome to the program this morning Shyam Sankar. He is the Chief Technology Officer of Palantir. Good morning, Shyam. Welcome to the program. Thank you for getting up early, for talking to me. Where are you today?
I happen to be in D.C., so no problem at all. Thank you so much, Hugh, for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Well, I have been pitching the Defense Reformation, which people can find at the number 18theses.com, and I read a lot of it in the first hour of the program, so I want to cut right to the chase. We talked about the Last Supper. We talked about Cost Plus. I want you to explain for the Steelers fans, and me, because I'm just as slow as a Steelers fan when we get to this line. The Great Schism has created a religion in government that is unaware or dismissive of power law outcomes from power law talent. In Silicon Valley, we call them 10x or 100x engineers, meaning they are 10x or 100x as valuable and productive as normal engineers. What is the Great Schism? Why doesn't DC want those people?
Well, if we go back to the industrial base that won World War II and won the Cold War, we would realize it looks very different than our defense industrial base today. When the Berlin Wall was just falling, only 6% of our spend on major weapon systems went to defense specialists, went to defense primes. The vast majority of the spend went to what I call as dual purpose companies. We forget that Chrysler built cars and missiles. Ford built satellites until 1990. General Mills, the cereal company, built torpedoes. We had a very different structure of the US economy. And what that really meant is that everything they were learning commercially, all of that R&D was subsidizing the lethality of our U.S. service members. Every car, camera, and cereal box that Americans bought actually enhanced our national security. Today, we've gone from 6% spent on defense specialists to 86%. And so we have really invested in and doubled down on a defense industrial base that lives on the Galapagos Islands. They're very far away from all the commercial innovation that's happening. And that commercial innovation, by the way, is what powers U.S. prosperity. Just look at what the U.S. commercial sector has delivered for the country here. And I think we need to get back to a place where we can leverage that and the talent that we have in that base to enhance our national security.
Now, Shyam, how do we disambiguate a situation that pathway evolution has taken to the 6 big primes? How do we get out of that in a hurry? My friend, Dr. Jerry Hendricks, I'm sure you've read some of his stuff. We've just got to get back to the pre-1989 competition in the private sector, variety of we just got to do it. How do we do that?
That's the most important question. And I think when people look at the Last Supper, the kind of conventional analysis suggests, what we really lost was competition in the industrial base. Undoubtedly, that consolidation led to less competition. But I think the high order bit, the real consequence, is that consolidation bred conformity. It pushed out the innovative founders. It pushed out the crazy engineers. And, this is a country that understands the importance of founders. We call them the founding fathers for a reason. You don't get SpaceX without Elon. You don't get the U-2 without Kelly Johnson. You don't get the Apollo program without Gene Kranz. And we have somehow washed over all of these efforts as if they're just faceless institutional efforts. And the dichotomy of public versus private is not the right dichotomy. It's really founder mode versus manager mode. And so I think you can solve this problem very quickly because $100 billion of private capital has been invested to build companies in the national interest. And you have a plethora of founders who have shown up. You have Palmer Luckey building Anduril. You have the Sang brothers building Shield AI. You have Palantir. It's like the founders are back. We just need to organize around this problem now.
Now, Shyam, there are 5 dominant elite cultures in the United States. One of them is irrelevant to this. That's the religious faith culture, and it really doesn't have much to do with the other 4. The other 4 are Beltway elites, Manhattan elites, Wall Street, Hollywood elites, creativity, and Silicon Valley elites, productivity and innovation. When Donald Trump won the first time, he turned to Wall Street elites. And they got some done, but they also got hijacked and cut off by Beltway elites. Do you think the Silicon Valley elites are better or worse prepared to fend off the Beltway elites' inevitable attack upon their arrival?
I mean, time will tell, but I'm quite optimistic because, to really execute a vision for the future, you need a definite and optimistic view of the future, that things can be better. You need a group of people that aren't preoccupied with self-loathing and believing that the country's not a great place, and that aren't kind of cynical about it, that have fundamentally a positive sum mindset. One of the secrets of Silicon Valley that I think even most Americans don't recognize, we kind of feel like we have this elite tech culture. Where did it come from? Maybe we imported it from Israel or India. No, we imported it to Silicon Valley for sure, but we imported it from Iowa. It is a culture deeply rooted in Midwestern sensibilities, a willingness to play positive sum games. And it came to the Valley from Bob Noyce, a great Iowan who was the co-founder of Intel, the co-inventor of the transistor. He coined the term open door policy. And that whole culture of innovation we have is actually descended from Noyce. And I think it's very powerful. It's why America has the best tech culture in the world by a yawning margin.
So when we go through the 18 theses, and I already read them to the whole audience, they know what it is. Cost plus contracting makes the nation dumber, slower, and poorer. That's number 2. And I read all 18 of them. National security as economic prosperity is the easiest one to understand. How soon, if Donald Trump looked at this and said, do that, how soon could it be done at DOD?
The place you start is that you increase the amount of competition inside the department. When Admiral Rayborn was building the submarine-launched ballistic missile, he actually had 4 competing programs running simultaneously. When we were building ICBMs, we didn't actually give the Air Force a monopoly. They had to compete and win with Minutemen. Every service threw their hat in the ring and they're trying to do it. This explains why space is such an innovative area right now, because it is, frankly, a food fight between NGA, NRO, Space Force, Spacecom, and that is actually productive. We need to get away from this sort of unitary effort, communist aesthetic that we should have one singular effort. This avoids duplication. We have to embrace the reality, the very American reality, that innovation is messy and chaotic, and lean into that rather than circumscribing the whole process in so many rules that you make sure in an effort to make sure nothing goes wrong, you also have all the rules that make sure nothing can go right.
So and the most obvious example of this is drone technology, which is being developed not just by a dozen different big companies in the United States, but by hundreds of companies worldwide. And as a result, we've got stuff flying around in New Jersey that we have no idea what it is. By the way, what do you think of that story?
I think it's terrifying. I think it shows, I have an expression inside of Palantir, the orcs in the Lord of the Rings sense, they spawn in the seams between teams. And I think a large part of this effort is, it's not a tech problem, really. It's really, we have a division of responsibility between FAA, DOD, and Homeland Security. And we need to reorganize ourselves around the problem, not be so victim to these arbitrary boundaries that we put up there. And I think this is, again, manager mode versus founder mode.
When you say terrifying, what could it be? I want to pick up on this. It'll be the headline, obviously, so be careful what you say. But when you say terrifying, why?
Because it shows a lack of domain awareness. It's one, we should be able to know everything that's happening on the homeland airspace, and we should be able to defend against it. Whether you shoot it down or not is a different decision. But we need absolute control, and we need to be able to know with precision where this is coming from and what our options to deal with it are. Play this forward, where you go from overflight surveillance of bases to the protection of the homeland, the stadiums that we have. How are you going to protect the people from these assets if you can't protect the bases?
Well said. Now I want to go to another part of the theses. Again, 18theses.com is where you go to read this yourself. The problem with Goldwater Nichols is it didn't go far enough. You can't have a joint department if services have monopolies on their Title X equipping responsibility. That's profound. It's interesting. It was foreshadowed. I sat down with a Marine Corps field officer who had just come back from Israel, where he was studying the Gaza war, and said they're so far ahead of us in how they do things and how quickly they learn. The key question, we were very far behind the Japanese and the Germans when World War II broke out. We caught up in a hurry. Do you think we can catch up in a hurry?
I would never bet against American innovation. Like at the end of the day, and I mean this in the most positive way, we're crazy. When push comes to shove, we will throw all the rules out and organize around the problem. The question is, how do we do that left of bang here? How can we look at what's happening in the world and get a head start on doing exactly that? And I'm confident that the things I'm saying, if we were in a conflict, people would just intuitively be executing.
Now, Shyam, the thing we need the most are submersibles, submarines and unmanned vehicles under the water. That's what we need the most. Hypersonic, some people argue, other people argue satellite, but we definitely need submarine. We don't have enough capacity to build our own, much less what we promised the Australians and the Brits have promised the Australians. What would you recommend Congress do in this CR and the first budget and in the NDAA, which is getting close to pass, to remedy that problem of capacity?
I have a bold vision here. I mean, I think there are no half measures that are really going to work. It starts with understanding that there's never been a military sea power that was not also a dominant commercial shipping power. We need to recognize that. So I think the half measure is saying, well, we have to prioritize one or the other. How do we just double down on building more and more military capacity? The reality is you can't get down the cost curve fast enough if you only are building military equipment. This is what you see at the HD Hyundai shipyards in Korea, that it is a whole town in Busan that's built around building both commercial and military ships. We still have a massive asymmetric advantage with our nuclear reactors. I think we should build the first commercial nuclear-powered cargo ship fleet in the world that are American-flagged, American-made, leveraging our military's greatest technology, driving the lowest cost of shipping in the world, bringing down inflation and the input costs, and use that to bootstrap and rebuild a massive bolus of investment into shipyards.
That's crazy talk. That's Rickover talking. But you're right. I read a bio of Rickover last summer, and I could not believe how much control he exercised. And thank God he was there, or we would be way behind everyone right now, but we're still way ahead. If the priorities are submersibles, satellites, and cyber, what does a Deputy Secretary of Defense need to know before they become a Deputy Secretary of Defense? Because Pete Hegseth is going to be the outward-facing guy, the public-facing recruitment guy. The DepSec is going to have to do the procurement. What do they need to know?
If we think about the Davidson window, there's not a lot of big, exquisite systems that you're going to be able to build and field in the next 2-3 years. But you can build and field a huge amount of software. And you're obviously not going to win the war by shooting software at your enemy here. But the extant capabilities that we do have, how do we wield them better? How do we have a substantially better OODA loop than our adversary? That is, in fact, a software problem. It's a problem that John Boyd would recognize. And the other part of this is, at the dawn of World War II, we were the best at mass production in the world. Today, unfortunately, our adversary is. So David is going to need a software-defined slingshot to drive production again. We have to give American workers superpowers in order to compete and produce. We have war game simulations say that we have roughly 8 days of weapons on hand for a China fight. That's obviously not scaring anyone. So we need closer to 800 days of weapons on hand, and we need to be able to make those weapons in entirely different ways.
Shyam, I got to tell you, this is the most expensive interview I've ever done. Because 3 weeks ago when we set it up, I sold all my Palantir because I can't have a conflict with someone. And the 3 weeks have been very, very good for Palantirs. I'm thinking to myself, God, this is an expensive interview, but that's okay. I love the way you close it. I nail these theses to the Pentagon Metro. Do you think the DOD wants what you're selling? Do you think the military wants what you're selling?
Honestly, when I did this, I wasn't so sure, but the response inside the building has been resounding. There's a huge amount of support. I think people really do see these problems. It's given a framework and some words to attach to the lived experience that our general officers have been fighting through, and the lived experience that staffers and Congress has been dealing with, and provides us a path to kind of chart our way out of it.
Are you going into the administration?
All options. Look, I'm very happy with Palantir, as you just said. We've built the world's leading AI product here. The demand in the U.S. commercial sector is just unbelievable. I've really enjoyed building that over the last 2 years. I've been at Palantir 19 years, so I'm very happy. But all options are on the table.
So tell me, I hope the president-elect is listening and that he brings you in and he does the SecDef thing, but we don't know, and I have no way of knowing. Talk to me a little bit about whether or not they're bringing too many people from Silicon Valley in. Because you put Elon, Vivek, you, and a bunch of these other people in a room. Are you guys ever going to agree on anything? And gals, are you ever going to agree on anything?
Well, like my view of this is we probably won't agree on everything, but I think we'll agree on enough to chart the path forward here. And you need a lot of like destructive creative energy to get off the kind of sclerotic mess that we've gotten into. I think we've gotten into a very low energy, high entropy state where, you know, things don't work, but we're trying to minimize interpersonal conflict. But we actually probably need more interpersonal. You think about Rickover, you brought him up. He was a notoriously difficult person, but where would we be without him? And it took the Congress had to protect him for 30 years as the head of the nuclear navy in order to deliver this capability that we still have an asymmetric advantage on top of. And so I think it really does start with people. As a technologist, maybe that's a little bit heretical, but you know, the technology is a tool for the commander or the principal's mind. It's like it's a software Iron Man suit to get more done. I think the kind of conventional view of technology is it makes the median person better, and it does, but it makes the very best person way better. And so it's really important to get those leadership roles right.
That's very true in the news media, by the way, so I know the applicability into what I do. First article I read this morning when I did show prep is in the Journal. Boeing delays mean Trump won't fly on a new Air Force One. Okay, so they're not going to deliver new Air Force Ones until 2029 at the earliest. You realize that that was a problem when he took office the first time in 2016? What does that tell you about Boeing and the industry generally?
To me, it tells me about manager mode, whether it's the public sector or private sector. When you have these institutions that are just trying to run based on a playbook, they're just trying to follow the rules. It's overly financially engineered. It's just what the MBAs tell you should be doing, and it's depriving us of the individual agency and creativity of founder mode, of people who have real insight to drive these things. It's fostered a legitimation crisis in the world, but also in our country, where we don't actually believe it engenders this nihilism. We don't believe these institutions work, and we got to throw away the playbook and actually build institutions that do work by organizing around the problems.
Cheyenne, I want people to go to 18theses.com and read it for themselves. My big question: there are 3 lethality innovators in the world, and I mean first tier: the United States, the People's Republic of China, and the Israeli Defense Forces and their tech center. Do you think Israel has clearly thrown in with us now? Because they danced on the edge of both for a while.
I think it's unequivocal that they've thrown it with us. I think, in crises like these, you take note of who your friends are. Obviously, there's been a probably an unsettling reaction in how divided the West has been in terms of supporting them, but they have also noted who has supported them.
Have you noted in both the Ukraine war and the Israeli war on 7 fronts any particular innovation that made you sit up and say, wow, we need to do that at Palantir or in the United States?
Well, the most important, there's probably 2 observations I'd offer you. The first is that, the drone obsolescence life cycle in Ukraine is something like 2 to 6 weeks. So that tells you that it's not actually what is your capability today. It doesn't matter how exquisite it is if you can't change it. So we need to be measuring and practicing the first derivative of how quickly can we adapt our capabilities to the changing battle space so that our capabilities are still relevant and still lethal. And that is a big mind shift. We've thought, look, we can develop exquisite things, we can put them on the shelf, and they'll be just as exquisite and just as useful 10 years from now. That world is gone. The second major lesson, people love to say, isn't it amazing what the Ukrainians did? Despite not having a navy, they sunk half the Russian Black Sea Fleet. And I think they got it backwards. It's because they didn't have a navy. They were able to come up with entirely different force concepts that sunk half the Black Sea Fleet. And this is another strong push for more competition.
Last specific question. The Congress is going to do a CR, and then they're going to do a budget resolution. Should they leave a large pile of money in one or the other to the DoD to distribute among the private sector to innovate as the 51 old primes used to do in a competitive, in other words, a sovereign wealth fund for defense industry? Should they do something like that?
I like the direction. I would say let the combatant commanders decide how to spend that money. That allows us to approximate market forces. I like to quip. Everyone has given up on communism, including Russia and the Chinese, except for Cuba and the DoD. We need to get away from central planning, the FIDIP, the 5-year plan, and we need to enable our combatant commanders to express market signal and demand and allow industry to respond to that.
Who do you read, Cheyenne? I mean, where do you get your ideas from on defense and on warfighting? There are historians like Andrew Roberts. There are technologists like Jerry Hendrick. What do you read?
I try to integrate it all. I mean, obviously, there's a great tradition of the Valley. You know, we're all students of Peter Thiel. There's great history on defense tech that goes back to the Cold War and World War II that I think is very important. And you know, there's a great quote from Vannevar Bush in 1940. He's telling FDR, the coming war is a technology war, and civilians believe that they can provide incredible capability that the military doesn't understand. I read that quote out of context, and I thought it was a quote in the present moment. You know, in some sense, there's nothing new under the sun, and it is our success, the fact that we have been a superpower, that we've had no competition for 30 years since the end of the Cold War, that allowed us to forget these lessons.
Do you believe the combatant commanders have got the skill sets necessary to spend the money?
I absolutely do. I have seen the amount of innovation that is coming out of the theaters, the combatant commanders. You know, we already doctrinally believe the commander is the most important person on the battle space, and we need to really organize around that principle. Look, if we lived in a world where all that mattered was the major platforms that took 30 years to build, the services need to build that. But if we're living in a world where the capabilities are moving every year to 3 years, you got to push more of the discretion and more of the speed towards the combatant commanders.
Shyam, thank you for joining me. I hope if you come into the administration, you'll keep coming back because people have to preach innovation. Now I can go back and buy some Palantir again, get back to work, make Gallagher work harder because he's probably sloughing off watching the Packers, and I appreciate the time. Thank you so much. Shyam Sankar's 18 Theses are available online at 18theses.com. Go read them and send them everywhere because every Trump appointee ought to be committed to this level of innovative disruption, not disruption for the sake of disruption, but disruption for the sake of productivity. It's the way America grows. It's always grown that way. We trust our innovators and our entrepreneurs to drive the country, not our bureaucrats, not the CHIPS Act. We've got to trust. I haven't heard that combatant commanders before. That's an interesting idea. I want to close by asking all of you to remember that Angel Tree is running this is very old school. We were just talking about high-end innovation. Let me talk about low-end innovation. Breaking the cycle of crime means making sure that the children of prisoners do not follow in their parents' footsteps. How do you do that? I talked about the 5 dominant cultures in America. One is in Hollywood, one is in Silicon Valley, one is in Manhattan, and one is in D.C. The 5th is the religious leaders of America, and one of those is prison fellowship because they understand the issue of prisoners and their families and how it creates major dysfunction in the country over generations. Prison fellowship through Angel Tree aims at the next generation, and it starts with a $30 contribution to provide a present under the tree, along with a contact with mom or dad. They get a note with the present. The mom or the dad from prison writes why they selected this present for that child. It's delivered by an Angel Tree volunteer, and the Angel Tree volunteer brings along a youth Bible and gets in contact with that kid. Angel Tree works. Please be generous. The banner is at hughhewitt.com.